Well, it's been a few days since I've done that. Welcome, everybody. House Tax will come to order. And just in the interest of the time, since this is our first meeting, we'll go through some brief introductions. We do have a new member of the committee, so we want to make sure she's not brand new. She subbed in a couple of times last year, but certainly want to welcome Representative Howerton to our committee. But we'll do brief introductions. I think we'll start down with Representative Haswood, and then we'll go through some announcements and get right on going here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Christina Haswood from House District 10, Lawrence, Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dennis Miller. I'm from District 14, which is in Olathe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Alcala. I represent the 57th District, Northeast Shawnee County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Cindy Howerton. I'm from District 98 in Wichita.
Mr. Chairman, Francis A. Camp, or District 61, Potawatomi in Jackson County. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Clark Sanders, District 69, and all of my district is in Saline County.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Mike Thompson, not the weatherman, and District 33, Wyandotte County, covers Bonner Springs and then going east to Edwardsville, Morris, Muncie, and then bottom half of Turner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the Liberal Republican.
Brian Burkamp, Southwest Sedgwick County. Looking forward to it this year.
As you can see, we don't run a very strict committee here. Chairman's a little bit lax, but my name is Adam Smith, not the 150-year-old economist, but I come from the 120th district out in Northwest Kansas.
Tom Sawyer, Wichita, 95th district. I have the Delano area of Wichita.
Jerry Stogstill, 21st District. I represent most of Prairie Village and a little part of Overland Park.
John Epley from the 63rd District, rural representative representing all of Atchison and all of Donovan counties in extreme northeast Kansas.
Ron Bryce, District 11, Independence, Coffeyville, Cherryville, and Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Nick Hoizel represents the 97th District, which is all of Southwest Wichita.
Carl Turner, Johnson County, Leawood, and Overland Park. District 28.
Henry Helgerson, 83rd District in Wichita.
Stephanie Clayton, 19th District. That's parts of Overland Park, Prairie Village, and Leawood.
And do we have any committee members joining us online? I forgot my laptop, so feel free to just speak up and introduce if you're online, please.
I'm Barb Blossinger. We're two at the same time. I'm Barb Blossinger, 111 days in Victoria, Western Kansas.
Thank you, Barb. Anybody else?
Thank you, Mr. Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
Tom Kessler, District 96, the South Central Wichita, Kansas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Representative Dave Beeler from the 40th District, Leavenworth, cities of Lansing, Leavenworth, and southern Leavenworth County.
Okay, I think that's everyone we have online. Now to the important people. I'd like to start with our staff at the middle table here. Mr. Siebers, would you want to go first, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam Siebers, Revisor Statutes Office.
Mr. Chairman, Amelia Kovar Donahue, Revisor's Office.
Eddie Penner, Legislative Research.
Leah Gerard, Committee Assistant.
I'm Lance Capshaw, the AV Tech assigned to the room for this year.
Welcome, Lance, and welcome everybody. As the committee already knows, Leah is probably the most important person in this room right here. So one thing I did want to segue a little bit into with the announcements. Leah has, as you probably have heard in other committees, there is a special email address. And Leah, if I have that right, it's just taxation@house.ks.gov. That will be where all of the testimony will need to go through. I think Leah's going to try to use that email address for most of your communications back and forth with her as well. She does still have that personal email address, but we need to make sure all the committee testimony and business goes to that new house tax email address. And Leah will send that out to us. The other thing for announcements is I wanted the revisor's office to cover, there's a little bit of a new rule in the, actually, did everybody get a copy of the rules? Did we get those distributed? They're the same as last year, just for your perusal and to refresh on those. Nothing has changed except the one provision. I'll let Mr. Siebers go over that briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As many of you may know, bills this year, House bills, will have not only the sponsor, if it's a committee bill, Committee on Taxation, they'll also have printed on the bills who the individual that requests the bills. And if, as a legislator speaking to here, if you want to request a bill through tax committee, perfectly fine, just say by Representative John Smith. But you can also, if you're doing it on behalf of someone, make sure to identify who that is. So if you're a constituent or an entity, you say you're doing it on behalf of that entity, so that gets printed on the bill. Excuse me. And then for the public that requests bills, it'll say requested by John Smith, or on behalf of XYZ Corp. So that's how it'll appear on the bills.
And that will be a change. I've always done it this way. I think my predecessor did it as well, but we welcome bill introductions or bill requests for introductions from the audience as well. So those names will be printed on the bills from this point going forward. Any questions regarding the rules or the new update? Seeing none, the only other announcement I have is obviously we're a pro forma. We're not meeting tomorrow. Also, Monday is a holiday. We won't be meeting. Tuesday, I originally had scheduled to reschedule our postponed meeting that was canceled this Tuesday. But the judiciary committees from both the House and the Senate are having a joint meeting. This is the only room. They meet at the same time we do. So I did relinquish the room to House and Senate Judiciary. If we ever need a payback, we can keep tally on that. But wanted to give them the opportunity to have their joint committee on the, I think they're going to hear from the Chief Justice a little bit more on the data breach and the situation that happened there with the attack on the systems. But we will not have a meeting then on Tuesday. We will come back. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday at normal time. So with that, first item of business, as always, would be requests for bill introductions. Do we have any requests today? Representative Helgerson and then Bryce.
I have two bills, RS 2452, and that's dealing with sales tax, and RS 2448, which is income tax.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit on the sales tax and income tax pieces?
April 1st date for the food sales tax.
Okay.
Governor made reference to it. She stole my idea, but I'm putting the bill in because I believe we've already passed the policy. I think we should move it ahead so that the taxpayers get an extra $100 million of tax reduction immediately rather than waiting till next January. And as for the income tax, that is changing the rates a little bit.
Okay. And what was the number on the second bill?
The second bill was 2448.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Any objection to the request? Seeing none, the request is approved. Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a bill requested by Representative Webster Roth, and it is 24 RS 2347. It's a property tax bill for residential properties, restricting homestead taxes to base year at age 65, so that people 65 and older will not have annual property tax increases. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Any objections? Seeing none, the request is approved. Any other further requests for bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move along to our first item of business today and welcome to committee the Honorable Mark Burghardt, Secretary of the Kansas Department of Revenue. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I apologize for the frog, but hopefully we'll make it through the presentation. You should have sent to you an electronic version of the schedules and charts that I will be referencing. So I hope those are at your disposal. And I guess initially the organization chart, I just want to cover very briefly. You all know the Department of Revenue is heavily involved with tax matters, but we also have a division of property valuation, a division of vehicles, and a division of the alcoholic beverage control. Those three divisions I'm not going to talk about today. I'm going to devote all of our time to the taxation, the division of taxation. And you will see in the flow chart there are a number of support groups that report directly to the secretary. Some of them are very, very important. Our Office of Policy and Research, Kathleen Smith is the director of that. Obviously heavily involved in the legislative process with fiscal notes, but that area of the department also is heavily involved with the development of tax policy, issuing private letter rulings, and really educating taxpayers across the state. We actually have an education unit that goes out across the state to educate. And then another, just very briefly, another important office is the Office of Financial Management. We have all of this revenue coming into the state that we collect for the local units, and it's that office to make sure that those distributions back to the local units are appropriate. Very critical to the local units of government. So with that having been said, I'd like to move on to some of the charts and schedules that have been compiled. And most of this information comes directly from the department's annual report that was, I think, uploaded very first part of the year for 2023. And there you have roughly 100 pages of everything you would ever want to know about taxes in the state of Kansas and really the performance last year. So let's talk about state receipts, and these are receipts that come in that the Department of Revenue is actually responsible for collecting. And you will see on page 1 that over $14 billion was collected and processed by the department. Last year, we had a tour of one of the areas of the department, the channel management area, and that is one of the areas that is responsible for collecting and processing much of this revenue. But you will see that there are some very major revenue sources. Obviously, individual income tax is the top. We really have 4 major tax types that bring in most of the revenue. Individual income tax, retailer sales tax, now corporate income tax, which has replaced compensating use tax as the third largest source, and then compensating use tax. In addition to all of the taxes that the department collects, we also collect a variety of fees related to vehicles and vehicle transactions. So you will see that everything that we collect is in the neighborhood of $14 billion. On page 2, you'll see how those funds that we've collected get dispersed or allocated, and you can see that over 70% of that just goes directly to the state general fund. And then we also have distributions to the highway fund and a variety of other refund funds. So turning over to page 3 gives you a pretty clear indication of the performance for some of these major tax types. Again, individual income tax is the largest, and one of the strongest components of individual income tax, and it's been this way for some time now, is withholding tax from wages of employees. Even last month, the growth in withholding tax was nearly 10% over the same month a year ago. So that particular revenue source has been very consistent and steady. And then you will see corporate income tax. You'll see a major jump that went from 806 million for fiscal year 2022 to 1.5 billion in fiscal year 2023. But I'm going to give you an explanation of how that occurred, and it doesn't, it's not going to be a simple or a simple explanation of how that jump occurred, and most of that jump relates to a piece of legislation that was passed in 2022 called the Salt Parity Act. So just from a pure tax revenue standpoint, we did collect $9.9+ billion in fiscal year 2023. Turning over to page 4 and 5, this is really for your, I guess, personal use. If you're interested in some of your counties where you may have constituents that you represent, this gives you a pretty good idea of the state taxes that are collected from those particular counties and then on a per capita basis. We often get requests for this types of information, so that is for your reading enjoyment. Turning over to page 6, this is very similar to what I reviewed last year, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but focusing again on the Division of Taxation, you will see the various units within the Division of Taxation. One of the areas I don't think we visited much about last year was the Revenue Recovery Unit within the Department of Revenue. And this is basically our collections unit. And last year, and this is reflected in our annual report, last year's fiscal year 2023 collection of delinquent taxes was nearly $250 million. And over the last 3 years, each succeeding year, a new record has been set. So going back over the last 4 years, perhaps just a little more than $1 billion of delinquent taxes has been collected and deposited into the state general fund. So, not going
Mr.
to
Secretary,
comment.
would you mind if we interrupted and just asked a few
Absolutely.
questions? I'd love to dig into that a little bit. How does that impact, and maybe that's a question for Eddie here too, but when we have our consensus revenues, do we plan on a certain amount of delinquent taxes being collected, and then we adjust estimates based on that? It sounds like that number is fairly steady, and would I be remiss to say that's kind of predictable, or are we are consistently receiving more each year?
When the delinquent debts are recovered, they are deposited just like any other tax. So if we collected $10,000 of delinquent individual income tax, that gets included in the income tax amount for that month. So it's taken into account in that manner, that those funds roll into the various tax types that we track separately. What is important is that, and again, roughly maybe 20 million, 18 to 20 to 22 million on a monthly basis is collected. But some of those collections are from years prior. So you can't for example, individual income tax, you can't necessarily take those into account when you're considering the performance for that particular fiscal year, because those taxes may relate to another tax year. It's just that we're collecting them this year. So does that hopefully
yes,
answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I should have said this earlier, but feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation as they come up. Representative Helgerson, did you have a question?
Mr. Secretary, previous years, we have had secretaries come and in front of appropriations or in this committee and say, if you add additional staffing, we'll bring in so many more dollars with delinquent not paid taxes. I guess the question is, are you fully staffed in this area? Has that been a successful program when it was implemented? Are there any comments you'd like to make?
At this point in time, we think we're adequately staffed. And we have roughly 250 employees that serve this function. And most of those employees work remotely. They're not in the office. And, I was very skeptical of whether this would work during the pandemic. And we learned that our productivity shot up during the pandemic. And a lot of it is just due to the fact that we are in real time able to determine exactly what our remote workers are doing because of the system that we have. And it allows us to engage employees in other parts of the state besides the city of Topeka. So again, it's tough to say anything negative about the process when each year you set a new record.
Well, you've touched on another question that I had, but first let me go back. So how many positions do you have in the staffing for, and you don't have to give it to me now, but how many people do you have dedicated to going back and collecting back unpaid taxes? What's the vacancy rate? I assume that you've given some kind of information to the budget division, to the governor's office about this, and it'd be helpful if you could share that sometime. The second part of that question, which you led into, which you mentioned last year and I think the year before, was that you've had a program of having individuals stay at home. And you found it to be very productive. I guess, especially with the office space that we have and needs in the future, have you done any analysis, and has that been provided to the governor's office, to the budget division? And if not, will you start putting something together for me and for other legislators? Because that raises the question how productive it is. And I'll tell you, because I've had conversations with other agencies, and other agencies say, yes, it is an advantage to have workers staying at home to do the work because they're more likely to stay state employees. But they have found that their productivity is not as good. So we haven't done an analysis of this. It's kind of whichever secretary makes the comments, but I guess we're going to get into that soon.
Right. So, Legislative Post Audit did a study recently of the benefits of remote work, and Revenue was one of those agencies that participated in that. And there is some cost savings associated with remote work. We are somewhat limited in terms of how we can benefit from remote work because of several long-term leases that we are tied into. Obviously, if you're working from home, you don't need the office space and you shouldn't be paying rent, but that's another issue. But again, from a productivity standpoint, and maybe over time, productivity will decline. I don't know. It just seems to me if you're removed from the work environment, you might lose some interest in what you're doing. But we have not seen that at all. In fact, the opposite is the case in terms of productivity. So Kansas has benefited tremendously by this work arrangement. And you make a point, it allows us to retain employees. These are difficult jobs when you're collecting. And, there would obviously be some turnover, but having an option to either work remotely or a hybrid schedule has reduced our turnover significantly.
Representative Turner, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's along the same lines. I mean, you had pointed to the increased recoveries over the last 4 years, and I was going to ask in a different way. Just, is that because of some focused effort on behalf of the department, or is that just kind of following the overall trend coming out of 2020 where everything is ramping up?
I think it's more the approach that the department has taken in its collection efforts. I've never been a real strong advocate of penalties, and my approach to collections, and having come from private practice where I represented thousands of taxpayers against the Department of Revenue, things come up in people's lives that they can't control. And our approach, and I know this is going to sound bizarre, our approach is to help folks figure out how to take care of their legal obligations. And we do lots of pay plans, looking at their financial circumstances, and again, try to be as accommodating as possible on penalties where there is discretion within the department as to whether or not those would be collected. Sometimes penalties are absolutely appropriate when somebody is just disregarding the law after being contacted repeatedly. But there are certainly situations where taxpayers just have circumstances that they need guidance in terms of helping them figure out how to get current with their legal obligations.
Further questions, Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Burkhart, you were bringing up the remote workers, and it comes to mind that there might be cybersecurity threats increased associated with that. I didn't know if you were prepared today to maybe give a little idea of what we're doing for cybersecurity in light of what happened to the court system. Thank you.
And I was going to touch on that, and I will be somewhat guarded in what I say, but obviously the Department of Revenue maintains a great amount of very confidential and personal information regarding Kansans. And we have devoted considerable effort to make sure our systems are secure. What you need to understand is that part of the information we have is federal tax information. And so we have some federal counterparts that are involved in our security as well. Same with Social Security and Homeland Security. We are constantly testing our systems and doing penetration tests to see if the system can be breached. But all of our individuals who are working from home are on systems that have to be compliant with the Internal Revenue requirements, which are very strict. So we feel comfortable that what we have is secure, but there is no time off. Security is pursued constantly, always looking for ways to better ensure the security of all of the data that we maintain. Just having seen what's happened recently, that would be devastating for a revenue agency to have its systems impaired. So rest assured that that is a key priority and mission of the department is to be secure. And it's just not tax information, it's information related to your driving records and the personal information that's obtained there.
Seeing no further questions, please continue, Mr. Secretary.
Okay, well then let's move on to a couple of the major tax types. Individual income tax on page 7. If you notice the 2023 amount of individual income tax that was collected dropped to 4.5 billion from 4.8 billion the prior year. And again, this has nothing to do other than moving money between tax types and tax periods as a result of the SALT Parity Act. When Congress passed the I'm trying to think in 2017.
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Tax Act. They, in order to fund rate reductions, whatever, they limited the amount of itemized deductions that an individual taxpayer could take for state and local taxes, limited it to $10,000. Okay, so that's what the feds did. Well, now 36 states have enacted something comparable to the SALT Parity Act, and this has nothing to do, or should have nothing to do, with the state of Kansas and its revenues. All the SALT Parity Act was designed to do was to allow individuals to get around that $10,000 cap. And how it works, and this is approved by the IRS, is that, and this primarily deals with just individuals who might be owners of limited liability companies, partnerships, or S corporations. And what the SALT Parity Act does, it gives those owners the option of having their corporation pay the tax. And at the corporate level, it's a business expense, and there are no limitations in what can be deducted. And then the individual owners will then get a tax credit for what was paid by the corporation. So we're shifting from individual income tax, and what happened, and this was illustrated right at the very end of 2022, and this was effective for tax year 2022. The amount of individual estimated tax at the end of 22 dropped dramatically, and just the flip occurred. Corporate estimated tax went up dramatically, and we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here. And again, it's just a shifting between tax types and tax periods, which has made it challenging from a revenue estimating perspective, because a corporation may pay the tax earlier in the year, and the corresponding refundable credit that goes to the owners may not be claimed until the following fiscal year. So again, very challenging to follow the impact that the SALT Parity has had on moving income between tax years. But in theory, it shouldn't, bottom line is it shouldn't cost the state anything, and the state shouldn't benefit from it in any way. It's supposed to be revenue neutral. But that is why you see some of these changes, and you're going to, when we get to the corporate income tax, you're going to see it there very dramatically. We have roughly 100,000 entities, flow-through entities, pass-through entities, where they could make this election. In 2023, we had roughly 16,500 make that election. So the corporations elected to pay the tax on behalf of their owners, and then the owners would be entitled to claim a refundable credit. The amount that could be claimed, and again, for 2023, a little over 20,000 individual Kansans claimed or could claim a refundable credit. The total amount of credits that would be refundable was $393 million. $256.6 million of that was actually refunded. This program, even though it means nothing to the state of Kansas, has been extremely time intensive and labor intensive for the Department of Revenue. The department is not going to pay a refund out unless it's absolutely certain that the refund amount is appropriate. The refund amounts here are significant. We have refunds that are over $1 million going to individuals. I was explaining to the chairman yesterday, just looking at 290 individual income tax returns was nearly $35 million. So the average refund there was $118,000. So when these returns come in, they're not run through the system and refunds sent out. These returns are work listed, and an individual examiner looks at those, and there's certain documentation that's required. One of the things that has to accompany the individual income tax return is it's called a Schedule K-9 that really lays out, and it comes from the corporation, but it lays out what the individual owner's share of that refundable credit should be. And we have had literally thousands of returns that come in that don't have that Schedule K-9. Our taxpayer advocate, Bob Cleland, has spent a large part of his year working with taxpayers because they don't understand why they're not getting their refund. Well, it's because you didn't provide the information that was very clearly set out that you needed to provide to document that you were entitled to this. And again, for months and months and months, he's spent his entire day dealing with literally thousands of K-9s for individuals. So hopefully this coming year will be smoother, that there's a bit of a learning curve for taxpayers, and they'll figure this out, that we need to follow the instructions and provide the documentation that's necessary for us to more quickly get the refunds out. You know, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask a question. If you were kind of wrapping up on this subject, this is much more burdensome than I ever anticipated, and perhaps the department as well. Is there something that we can do to help streamline this process, to relieve some of this burden? What can we do to help this situation out?
There are some technical corrections that need to be made to the law. This statute was modeled after Colorado's statute. Colorado, after the first year, recognized that their statute had flaws in it, and they amended it. And we need to do the same. Some of these corrective amendments were included in Senate Bill 8 last year, but that would go a long ways to resolving some of the issues that are out there. But again, we're just hopeful this second year of the cycle is, people will have a better understanding of what they need to do. So.
Yeah, I would anticipate that, the first year out in a program, things are always a little bit questionable. There's a lot of questions out there. So hopefully we can work with the CPAs across the state and get some good information out there. If there's additional guidance that needs provided, or obviously the technical corrections, we need to get those changed in statute. But all ears if you have any suggestions on how we can help reduce this burden.
So for certain months out of the year, we have work lists for returns that get rejected by our system as a result of fraud edits or for a variety of reasons. Our work list for a number of months out of the year increased by 10,000 per month based upon this, the Salt Parity Act. And again, that takes an individual revenue employee to verify that the $118,000 that we're sending out to somebody is correct and legitimate.
Representative Helgerson.
So if you get complaints from folks, that is the justification for delays in refunds. Absent this, our normal refund time frame is 3 to 7 days after the electronic return is filed. So very quick turnaround, and that's even after doing fraud edits. So, but salt parity returns are a different matter. It has slowed down the process of providing refunds. So,
yes, Representative Helgerson.
You made reference to it. Last year, I'd introduced the cleanup bill that accountants and you had worked on, and it got mixed in with the other tax issues and got vetoed. Have you begun work with the accountants group and to have a cleanup bill ready so that we can introduce it this year?
yes, we have.
Okay.
And we've communicated that to the chairman, and the department will come forward with a draft that is in agreement with the CPA Society in terms of really addressing the issues that are out there right now in the statute that is currently drafted. And again, from the department's perspective, this was to be revenue neutral. And it's, you can't interpret a statute when it says the credits shall be claimed by the corporation. I can't interpret it to say, no, what it really means is supposed to be claimed by the individuals. But that's what the statute says. We have to go with the plain reading of the statute. A technical correction would be great.
Seeing no further questions, Mr. Secretary, please continue.
Okay. Well, then, so that gives you an idea, again, on page 7, why you see the drop in individual income taxes, because the estimated tax component of that dropped off because the individuals weren't going to pay the tax. They were going to turn around and have the corporations pay it. And we're going to see how the corporation numbers went up. So on page 8, I won't spend any time on this, and you've seen plenty of runs that show a bracket analysis of how many taxpayers fall into the different tax brackets. So again, on page 9 as well, just gives you an idea how many different types of taxpayers fit into these, whether you're married filing jointly or single, or married filing single, head of household. It gives all of those stats. So you can see that for resident taxpayers for 2021 tax year, 500,000 filed jointly. That same year, over 600,000 filed a single taxpayer return. So on an annual basis, we're looking at roughly 1.6 million individual income tax returns coming in and being processed. We have encouraged, and we continue to encourage folks to file electronically. We have evidence that shows when you have an electronically filed return, the error rate is maybe 2 to 3%. If you have a paper return, it's 10 to 15%. So you're going to get your return processed quicker, your refund faster if you file electronically. Right now, we have roughly 90% of taxpayers file electronically.
Representative Sanders, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any thought of making this a requirement and removing the option of a paper return?
But that certainly is an option. I can tell you that that is a requirement for filing sales tax returns, and we still get a percentage of taxpayers who file paper sales tax returns. I guess the question is, how do you effectively enforce that that prohibition? And there would be some within the legislature who have the view that not everybody has the capability to use electronic filing, so they should still have that option. But from our perspective, an electronically filed return is great, and if we could get everybody to do it, that would streamline the process even more. The area of the department that you toured last year, channel management, that's the area that gets all the paper. So its workload would drop significantly.
Has there been a trend to more paperless returns?
I don't think so. I think we've been pretty, if I'm understanding the question, we've been pretty consistent, around 90% coming in electronically.
So then based on that, it's not likely it's going to change until a change is forced.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, please continue.
Again, just commenting on individual income tax returns. We do have our systems, operating systems structured such that we have fraud edits that occur. Last year, we stopped roughly 14,000 refunds coming from what were suspected to be fraudulent returns, and roughly $15 million was saved and not refunded on those particular returns. So again, even though we have some pretty, what we think are some pretty fast refund times, those refunds nevertheless are verified through our fraud edit. And there were just some common sense things that we do. We're not going to send somebody out of a payment, electronic payment to an account out of state unless we've confirmed that that's a legitimate account. Somebody filing a tax return for the first time, not having a history with the department, we're going to look at that, because that's one of the areas where fraud exists. People just filing returns, hoping that the state of Kansas will deposit some money into an account. So it's those types of things that will pull or cause returns to be pulled out of the process and work listed. And that's where an individual examiner does his job or her job to make sure that the return is legitimate and that the refund is appropriate. I think I've already talked, I was going to touch on data security, but I think I've already covered that sufficiently. So on page 10, just gives you an idea, again, the number of the returns that are filed. And again, roughly 90% are filed electronically. So going over to page 11, this is the third major tax type, corporate income tax. Again, if you look at 2023 compared to 2022, you'll see a nearly $700 million increase in receipts. If you look at the corporate receipts, even for like 2021, the receipts had gone up. 2022, they went up even further. calendar year 2022 was the most profitable year ever for corporations in the United States. So you would expect 2022 and 2023 receipts to be higher because of that. But again, for 2023, a large part of that increase is the fact that individuals reduced their estimated tax payments because of the SALT Parity Act and instead had the corporation pay the tax. And that's what's elevated or is one of the major reasons why that amount for 2023 is so high. So moving on to page 12, very briefly, this is just privilege tax receipts. This is a tax on banks and savings and loans. You probably wonder, why do we have a special tax for banks and savings and loans? Why don't we just have a corporate income tax for them as well? And the reason is banks have federal instruments, and under the Supremacy Clause, the states can't tax the income from federal instruments. So to get around that, we're not under the privilege tax. We're not taxing that income. We are collecting a fee for the privilege of doing business in the state that just happens to be measured by the income from the preceding year. So that's why we have a privilege tax. If you look in for 2021, you'll see a spike in revenue there. And that is largely caused by the fees that banking institutions received, their percentage, I guess, of the payments under the Payroll Protection Program, the PPP loans. You know, and it affected banks who did a lot of work in that area. It also affected accounting firms who did a lot of this work. You could see increases in revenue attributable to those fees associated with working on those loans. So you'll see then after 2021, you're probably going to come down to the more normal privilege tax receipts. And actually, they're still even a little bit higher than they were pre-pandemic. So over on page 13, I'm confident you're going to see lots of tax bills this session. This gives you some idea of, on the corporate income tax side, how many corporations there are and sort of how their income is stratified. You will notice that of the 30,000 corporations, 18,000 pay no tax whatsoever. So over 60% of corporations doing business pay no tax. You'll also see in that table at the top that under 4%, 3.4, I believe, or 3.1, I'm sorry, 3.1% of the corporations pay over 90% of the liability in the state. So the liability is really limited to the very limited number of corporations. In this particular case, 965 will pay 90% of the liability. So, and I'm reported on this last year, but it's effective now. Our normal or our prior law would have imposed a tax on corporations. It's a base rate of 4% and a surtax of 3% for anything over $50,000. That changed as a result of the Apex legislation and Panasonic. That base rate is now 3.5, effective January 1 of this year. So there will be presumably an impact on corporate receipts as a result of that rate reduction. And there is a possibility of a further 0.5% rate reduction next January 1 of 2025, depending upon the Integra project in Wichita. So those were my only comments on corporate income tax. But again, I just wanted to make it clear that that significant bump from one fiscal year to the next is not just attributable to excess profits by the corporations. Most of that has to do with salt parity. And that money that shows up in those corporate dollars very likely is going to be refunded months later through the individual income tax route because of the refundable tax credit mechanism under the Salt Parity Act. So again, presumably, if everything worked perfectly, it'd be a wash. Problem is, you're moving dollars between tax types and tax periods, and in particular fiscal years, which is challenging for revenue estimators. That's all I have on corporate. Just moving on very quickly then to retailer sales and compensating use taxes. You can see the increase in revenues that have occurred since the Wayfair decision out of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that decision came down on June 21st, 2018. And if you look at, for example, fiscal year 2018, that would have been the last fiscal year prior to the Wayfair case. And you scroll down to 2023, you can see that receipts for compensating use tax, and that's the tax that's imposed on transactions where you are using and consuming goods that you purchase and were delivered into the state, that receipts from that source for fiscal year 2023 was over 800 million, which is roughly double what it was prior to the Wayfair case. And, you know, when Wayfair came down, the department implemented Wayfair through one of its revenue notices. But really, one of the things that impacted receipts from the sales under the Compensating Use Tax Act was the legislature's enactment of the marketplace facilitator provision. And if you look at FY 2023, of that $802 million, 113 million of that came from marketplace facilitators. So again, the state was able after Wayfair to collect taxes that were always due. They just were not able to be collected if there was no physical presence in the state by the out-of-state company. So presumably some inflation is factored into this, these dollars, but for the most part, it's really just the ability to collect taxes that were once due but never paid or could not be collected. So any questions on that? We can move on. On the next page, 15, I indicated that our statute requires retailers to file electronically. Most do, 98% do file electronically, but our channel management area still receives lots of paper returns, and we still receive lots and lots of checks, paper checks. There are days during the processing season we'll deposit $30,000 to $40,000 checks. So it's very important the equipment that we have, captures all the information, which then gets credited to the proper account. And you saw some of the equipment that the department purchased as part of its modernization effort in channel management. And that will, again, allow us to do this deposit methodology more quickly and more accurately. So on page 17, again, just kind of breaks out the distribution of, page 16 and 17 breaks out the sales tax, state sales tax by county, and very similar to the prior chart under the individual income tax. Moving on then to page 18, you can see the most current collections of motor fuel tax. Those receipts have been relatively stable. Very likely the transportation committees in the future will be looking at other revenue streams to fund highways, particularly with more electrical or electric vehicles being purchased. So moving on to mineral severance tax, you can see the receipts for 2023, FY 2023. The mineral severance tax is, the tax is just based upon price and production. So if production's up, receipts are going to be up. So many, particularly in the stripper wells and some of the gas wells, we have minimum production exemptions that exempts certain wells. But at this point in time, receipts are in the 72 million range. I sadly can remember back in 1983 when the severance tax was enacted, the receipts even back then were over 100 million. But things were different back then. So I just happened to be the first severance tax attorney for the state when that was passed. So it's burned in my brain. On page 20, food sales income tax credit. We used to have a sales tax. It used to be a refund. It was converted to a credit a number of years ago. That's going to be phased out totally and off the books as soon as our rate reduction on food sales is eliminated completely. So, which will be soon. When the refund was being allowed, 400,000 Kansas taxpayers would get a refund under this program. And you can see now that the dollar amount hasn't really varied much, but the number of claims allowed has gone up just a bit. So moving over again very quickly to page 21, homestead property tax refunds. We had a new program that was put in place as a result of recent legislation, but we basically have three options for taxpayers. And for tax year, and again, we're talking tax year, January to December 2023, we had roughly 70,000 refunds under the homestead or claims allowed under the homestead programs, roughly 23 million. So there hasn't been much variation in the amount that's been awarded. I would note, and we are trying to take some extra effort or make some extra effort to perhaps educate folks more on the new program, because there are, I think we've had 5,000 returns rejected for not being proper or properly prepared. And the newest program is one where you establish a base year for the value of your property tax. If it the following year goes up beyond the base, you get a refund of the property tax related to that incremental increase. Taxpayers file tax returns thinking that they're getting all of their property tax back. So again, I think we just need to focus a little more on taxpayer education in this particular program. So on page 22, I don't want to go through all of this, but it kind of gives you an idea of the context that we have from the public, and this is just in the area of taxation. The Division of Vehicles has hundreds of thousands of calls a year as well from licensees. But in general, we think the answer rate, and when we talk about an answer rate, that's when somebody might call in, they'll be put in a queue, or they'll leave a message, and we'll try to get back to them. Well, it's counted as a completed call if we make contact with the taxpayer. Sometimes, you leave messages to them and they just don't follow up. So, but again, the performance of our customer relations staff, I think, is pretty good. So to wrap things up, on page 23, calendar year 2023 tax operations, we have, again, 1.6 million individual income tax returns that have been processed. 930,525 of those resulted in refunds, and refunds totaling 735 million were paid last year. Again, the refund time in general was between 3 and 7 days, which again is a very high percentage. Some of the things that we're continuing to do at the revenue aren't very exciting, but are extremely important. The continued modernization and completion of our modernization effort in the channel management will greatly improve the situation there. We're going to obviously come forward with some corrective legislation on salt parity and hopefully improve that area. Salt parity is going to be interesting because this $10,000 cap is set to phase out at the end of 2025 at the federal level. Now, obviously, there'll be legislation introduced to address that at some point in time, but at this point in time, it's scheduled to sunset at the end of 2025. So then we'll have a Salt Parity Act on the books when there is no cap anymore at the federal level. So the whole purpose of having the salt parity doesn't exist anymore. So that will have to be monitored very closely to see what the feds do. One of the things that we did during 2023 was to establish a payment portal for the Department of Revenue. A portal where you can just pay your taxes. You wouldn't have to open up an account and go through that process with the department. You can just go online through our portal and make a payment. In 2023, and it really didn't kick off until maybe the beginning of the second quarter. We had 40,000 transactions there and collected $138 million. Some of that would be coming from folks who may have been delinquent on their taxes. So we think that's been a very positive development. One of the other pieces of legislation that was passed last year, right now when a taxpayer has an issue with the Department of Revenue and we have a tax warrant on file putting a lien on their property to secure the state's interest, when that matter gets resolved through a settlement agreement, whatever payment, before the enactment of House Bill 2002, what the department would do once the liability was resolved is that the department would mail what is called a satisfaction of judgment to the taxpayer, and it was incumbent upon them to go out to the district court and record that satisfaction of judgment, and that removes the lien. You know what happens. A lot of taxpayers did not do that, and the liens were out there. What the legislature did last year, and we think this is an improvement, clearly, is that the burden shifts to the department to notify the district courts of the lien release. And what we do is when we resolve the tax liability, we, at the same time, pursuant to the statute, collect the filing fee for filing that satisfaction of judgment. And we want to do this electronically. At this point in time, I'm not sure, maybe by tomorrow it'll be different, but we have worked to make it such that we would file these lien releases, satisfactions of judgment electronically with the court, and then remit the payments to the court electronically. Obviously, with what has happened since October 12th has slowed that process down. So what we will do is to make sure, the responsibility is the department's now. So if we can't do it electronically because of the system's still coming back online, we will in fact mail the document to the district courts and make the payment. So that the obligation is on the department, not the taxpayer. And but at some point in time, we hope very soon this will all be electronic. We're also expanding the use of chatbots for all of the tax types that seem to be very popular. Looking forward to calendar year 2024, tax processing individual returns will begin January 29th. That's when the Internal Revenue Service system becomes active. So, when federal returns are prepared, state returns go along with them, and the feds then send the state returns to us. So their system has to be activated first. Refund goals, again, we're hoping and feel very comfortable that we'll be able to process refunds in the same timeframes that we did last year, which is incredibly fast. I remember years past where there was a statutory provision where the department didn't have to pay interest on a refund if they could refund it in less than 6 months. So getting a refund out in 3 days versus the 6 months is a significant improvement. We will finish our channel modernization. We're expected to have that mid-year. And again, some of the less exciting aspects, we still have some of our tax types on our old mainframe, and that all of that is being migrated away from the mainframe to our automated tax processing system, which again, not very exciting, but extremely important for the department in terms of being able to process efficiently. And it's not on here, but one of the other things that we are focused on right now is making sure that over the next 3 to 5 years, we have staff that has the expertise to step in to key management positions, because we have a number of upper level managers who will be leaving the department within the next 3 to 5 years. And so that effort to make sure that next level can take the step up and maintain operations at the same level they are now or better, depending upon the circumstances. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Be happy to answer questions and or not.
Okay, committee, are there any questions? Everybody's excited to get home. Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, I just want to send a great big thank you for Bob and the taxpayer advocate. I've been working with him for years in the business that I do outside the legislature. He is phenomenal, and just want to make sure that you know that he does such a great job.
Bob Clellan is our taxpayer advocate. Bob's been with the department 46 years. There's nobody who knows the department better. One of the first decisions and one of the smartest decisions I made when I came on as secretary is that I moved Bob from the Scott building over to the Mills building 3 doors down from me. Bob handles the most contested, nasty situations that come up, and he does it with grace. And what you have just stated, I get those comments many times a week.
Mr. Secretary, I just had a couple of quick questions. You referenced the payment portal. Is that mostly used for, you said something about the revenue recovery, but is it income tax? Is it sales tax collections? Is it everything?
We are expanding it, but it will eventually be anything that comes in, but we're adding tax types as we go along. And this particular portal was developed, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Information Network of Kansas and the platform manager, drawing a blank. The platform manager for Inc. is who worked with the department to develop that, and at a very reasonable cost, zero. So.
And my final question, I'll admit it's not regarding the report, and it might be a question that's answered later on, perhaps by Kathleen Smith that we see regularly here, providing our fiscal notes. Is one of the things that is very we're going to see a lot of bills on this probably this year is property tax. And what kind of access do you have, if any, to local data? A lot of the property tax decisions that we will make may not have a lot of impact on state revenues, but they could have significant impacts on local governments and their revenues. Believe me, when I was a county commissioner, I would have loved to have a research department for the county to understand how certain decisions impact county revenues. Is there any kind of connections that you have with local governments? So as we're looking through fiscal notes on these property tax bills that we anticipate, we have a good, accurate perspective on how that might impact them.
I was just looking over my shoulder for David Harper to help me out. David Harper's our property valuation director. I'm not sure I can intelligently answer that in terms of what's available. What I will tell you is, and Mr. Harper will be coming to the committee to give you a demonstration of a new platform that the department is going to have called Assessment Connect. And it's where information, valuation information will be gathered from all of the counties. And the counties are very excited about this. And this technology is such that it allows detailed analytics to occur. So the counties will know what other counties are doing, and that will assist in uniformity. And this particular platform will also be a benefit to PVD in terms of its analytics, and hopefully beneficial to you because PVD will be able to increase its analytical capability for legislative requests. And the other aspect of this is that there's going to be a public-facing portal that taxpayers can go on and look up information as well. This project was funded, again, by a grant from the Information Network of Kansas of $2 million. And great progress has been made, and we will probably, in the first quarter, have Assessment Connect in pretty good shape between now and then, we'll be before the committee and give you a demonstration of the capabilities of this program. And I don't know if some of the information that will be coming through that source will enable to have the department be more current with the information that comes from the counties, because it's going to be real time.
Yeah, and I know and it depends on the bill and what we're doing with property taxes. I really want to be cognizant of that, both as a former county commissioner and as legislature, to understand how the decisions we're making here will impact local government proactively, not reactively after we make a decision and then we see the impact of that. So even if we're a little bit delayed, and that's, I guess, fair warning to the committee, if you have a local government or a property tax bill, I'm going to probably work with the local governments, the cities and the counties, school districts. We have a little bit more information on the schools, obviously, but just to make sure we get a sample of Kansas counties across the state to try to provide some of that information so we do have an accurate picture.
On legislative issues, Mr. Harper does work with the Kansas County Appraisers Association, the treasurers, and I don't know. At this point in time, I think that's our method of communicating on major issues like that with the representatives of the counties. But again, with some of the technology that might be coming, getting more input from a broader spectrum of appraisers or commissioners or whomever, that might be an option.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Committee, are there any final questions? Representative Turner.
I know the committee won't be happy about that. Anyway, you had commented on the corporate tax about how a small number of payers paid 95%, I believe. I was looking back at slide 3, and if I do the math right, it looks like 20% of the top is paying 74% of the liability. Does that sound about fair?
I'm sorry.
I'm on slide. Oh, sorry, it's 8. My
8.
eyes. Yes, looked like a 3. But so I have an observation is if I'm looking at the total liability there of 3 million or 3,759. So the bottom two are paying 74% of the tax, 20% of the returns. But my question is on the top line. So that negative $1,138,000. So I assume those credits are refundable credits to the point that they are added into that column of total liability.
It may be a situation where somebody doesn't have a tax liability, but they may have had withholding that they're entitled to a refund. And maybe I'm not tracking.
Well, the column's headed liability. So I don't know. It makes me, the question was just, are those refundable credits? And they would appear to be, since it's a negative liability. Yeah. And the bottom two show that 74% of the liability is on 20% of the returns. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's a good point. And if we need to, maybe we can dive into that and make sure we understand that data more clearly, because that's a good point. See no further questions. Last chance. All right. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for addressing the committee and covering this information. Are there any further announcements for the good of the committee? Seeing none, thank you all for staying late on a Thursday afternoon as weather's getting bad, and we are adjourned.